Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Special Forces Training Compound. April 1968. The morning sun was already heating up the North Carolina humidity, turning the air thick and oppressive by 9 a.m., the kind of weather that made physical exertion feel like moving through water. Inside the Special Forces Training Compound, a restricted facility where America's most elite soldiers prepared for unconventional warfare, the atmosphere was focused and serious. No wasted movement, no casual conversation, just professional warriors honing skills that would keep them alive in the worst environments on Earth. This wasn't a public gym or a commercial martial arts school. This was where Green Berets trained in hand-to-hand combat, where Rangers learned close-quarters fighting, where the military's elite operators developed the skills they'd need when missions went wrong and violence became personal and immediate. The instructors here weren't teaching sport martial arts or self-defense for civilians. They were teaching combat methods designed to kill or disable enemy combatants quickly and efficiently. Techniques tested in Korea and Vietnam, refined through after-action reports from soldiers who'd survived hand-to-hand encounters in actual warfare. The training hall was a large concrete building with high ceilings, minimal windows, and walls covered with instructional posters showing joint locks, chokes, knife defenses, and killing techniques. The floor was covered with thick mats to prevent injury during throws and takedowns, and though injuries were still common because the training emphasized realism over safety. The equipment was military issue, heavy bags that could withstand devastating strikes, grappling dummies built to absorb punishment, training knives and rifles for weapon retention drills. Among the instructors was a man who embodied everything Special Forces hand-to-hand combat represented. His name was Master Sergeant Jack Thornton, 38 years old, with 20 years of military service, including 3 combat tours in Vietnam. Jack stood 6'2", weighed 210 pounds of functional muscle built through military training and actual combat, and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who'd survived situations that killed better men. Jack's combat resume was extensive and verified. He'd been in close-quarters firefights, had killed enemy soldiers with his hands when ammunition ran out, had survived ambushes and prisoner interrogations, and situations where improvisation meant the difference between living and dying. His body carried the evidence, scars from knife wounds and shrapnel, a permanently stiff left shoulder from a bayonet that had nearly severed the muscle, knuckles that had been broken multiple times from striking without gloves or protection. But beyond his personal combat experience, Jack was a serious student of military hand-to-hand combat systems. He trained in the Army's combatives program, had studied Marine Corps martial arts, had learned additional techniques from Special Forces instructors who'd fought in World War II and Korea. He'd integrated everything into a brutal, efficient fighting system that emphasized finishing fights quickly through whatever means necessary. Eye gouges, throat strikes, groin attacks, joint destructions, nothing off limits when your life depended on winning. Jack had opinions about civilian martial arts, about karate and kung fu and the Eastern systems that were becoming popular in America. He'd seen some of those martial artists, had watched demonstrations, had even worked with a few who'd been brought in to teach military personnel. His assessment was consistently negative. Too much emphasis on form and tradition, not enough emphasis on dealing with real violence from determined opponents. Too many rules about what was honorable or sporting, not enough understanding that combat had no rules and honor got you killed. In Jack's worldview, real fighting was chaotic, desperate, terrifying. It was about survival through any means necessary, about doing whatever worked regardless of how it looked or whether it violated some traditional martial arts code. The techniques needed to be simple enough to execute under extreme stress, brutal enough to end fights immediately, and tested against real resistance from people actually trying to hurt you. Bruce Lee's visit to Fort Bragg had been arranged through unusual channels. A Special Forces officer named Colonel David Chen, Chinese-American, had seen Bruce demonstrate at a tournament in California and had been impressed enough to mention it to his commanding officer. The CO, skeptical but curious, had authorized an invitation for Bruce to visit the compound, maybe give a demonstration to the hand-to-hand combat instructors, to show what civilian martial arts looked like so the instructors could better understand what they were competing against. Bruce arrived on a Wednesday morning in April, driven onto the base by Colonel Chen, going through multiple security checkpoints, signing documents acknowledging the classified nature of the facility. He wore simple black pants and a gray polo shirt, carrying a small bag with training equipment, looking impossibly small and civilian in this environment of large soldiers and military infrastructure. Colonel Chen walked Bruce to the training hall where a dozen hand-to-hand combat instructors had gathered, all of them seasoned soldiers, most with combat experience, all of them curious about this famous martial artist, but deeply skeptical about whether anything he taught would have value for actual military combat. Jack Thornton was among them, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, his expression showing polite interest mixed with fundamental disbelief. He'd agreed to attend this demonstration because orders were orders, but he fully expected to see choreographed movements and cooperative techniques that would fall apart the moment real violence entered the equation. Colonel Chen made introductions, explaining Bruce's background, his television work, his martial arts innovations, his philosophy about adapting techniques to real combat situations. The instructors listened politely, some taking notes, others clearly waiting for the demonstration to begin so they could evaluate whether this civilian had anything worth learning. Bruce began by explaining Jeet Kune Do's core principles, the emphasis on directness over classical forms, or the integration of techniques from multiple martial arts, the focus on what worked in actual combat rather than what looked impressive in demonstrations. He demonstrated some basic strikes, showing economy of motion, explaining how eliminating wasted movement increased speed and power. The instructors watched with professional interest but obvious skepticism. What Bruce was showing looked fast and precise, but it was being demonstrated on cooperative partners against people who weren't really trying to hurt him. The question hanging in the air was whether any of this would work when someone was actively trying to kill you, when adrenaline made fine motor skills disappear, when fear and chaos made precise techniques nearly impossible to execute. After about 20 minutes of demonstration, Jack Thornton pushed off from the wall and spoke up, his voice carrying authority that made everyone pay attention. "Mr. Lee, with respect, what you're showing looks impressive in a controlled environment, but I've got concerns about whether it would work in actual combat in the situations our soldiers face." Bruce stopped demonstrating and turned to face Jack. "I appreciate your skepticism. What specifically concerns you?" Jack walked toward the center of the training hall, his movement confident and measured. "Several things. First, you're demonstrating on partners who know what's coming, who aren't resisting, who are cooperating to make the techniques work. Real combat isn't like that. Real combat is someone trying to kill you with full commitment, full aggression, full intent." "You're absolutely right," Bruce agreed. "Your cooperative demonstration doesn't prove combat effectiveness. What would convince you that these principles work under real conditions?" Jack smiled, but it wasn't particularly friendly. "Let me try to hit you. Not demonstration, not cooperation. Let me actually try to land strikes with full power, full speed, the way I would in combat. If your techniques can handle that, if you can defend against real aggression from someone with combat experience, then maybe there's something here worth considering." The training hall went quiet. The other instructors, recognizing this, had just escalated from friendly demonstration to serious test. Colonel Chen looked alarmed, understanding that Jack was proposing essentially a real fight, that Bruce could get seriously hurt. "Jack," Colonel Chen started, "that's not why we invited Mr. Lee here. Well, this is supposed to be educational, not confrontational." But Jack wasn't backing down, and several other instructors were nodding agreement with his challenge. "If we're going to learn from this guy, we need to see if his stuff works under pressure. Otherwise, it's just another martial arts demonstration that looks good, but falls apart when violence gets real." Bruce was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he nodded. "I accept your proposal, but with conditions. One exchange, you attack me however you think best, full commitment, full intent as you said. I'll defend and counter. If I fail, if you land your attack cleanly, that proves your point that this won't work in real fighting. If I succeed, if I can defend and counter effectively, then perhaps you'll consider that there might be value in what I'm teaching." "On one exchange proves nothing," Jack countered. "Anyone can get lucky once. Give me 3 attempts, 3 different attacks. If you can handle all 3, I'll accept that maybe your techniques have real combat value." 3 attempts. But I need you to understand something first. Bruce said, his voice serious. If I defend and counter for real, someone could get hurt. I'll control my strikes, but even controlled counters to vulnerable targets can cause injury. Jack laughed, and it was genuine amusement. Brother, I've been in hand-to-hand combat in Vietnam. I've taken knife wounds, been hit with rifle butts, fought men who were trying to kill me. I think I can handle whatever you're going to throw at me. The instructors cleared space in the center of the training hall, forming a loose circle, everyone understanding they were about to witness something significant. This wasn't just a demonstration anymore. This was a direct test of whether civilian martial arts could stand up to military combat training, whether Bruce Lee's techniques worked against someone with real combat experience and genuine intent to hurt. Colonel Chen pulled Bruce aside. Bruce, this is a bad idea. Thornton's a legitimate combat veteran. He's bigger than you, he's trained specifically for killing, and he's not going to hold back. If you get hurt, this whole visit becomes a diplomatic incident. I understand the risks, Bruce replied calmly, but this is exactly the situation that tests whether what I teach is real or just theory. If I can't handle a committed attack from a trained fighter, then everything I've been teaching is questionable. Jack took position in the center of the cleared space, loosening his shoulders, his body language shifting from casual to predatory. The other instructors watched with intense focus, most of them expecting Jack to validate their skepticism, to prove that real combat training beats civilian martial arts. Bruce stood across from Jack, maybe 10 feet of distance between them, his stance relaxed and neutral, hands at his sides, showing no defensive positioning. To the military instructors watching, this looked dangerously naive, facing a combat veteran with no guard, no obvious preparation for violence. What kind of attack are you planning for your first attempt? Bruce asked. Straight rushing attack, Jack replied. I'm going to close distance fast and throw a combination, jab, cross, hook, the way I would in actual combat. Military boxing, proven effective in hundreds of fights. Whenever you're ready, Bruce said simply. Jack exploded forward with surprising speed for his size, closing the 10 feet in 3 explosive steps, his left jab snapping out to set up the more powerful right cross, the combination thrown with genuine intent and professional technique, the kind of attack that had ended fights in actual combat situations. But none of the punches landed. What happened next was so fast that most of the instructors couldn't fully process it, would need to discuss it afterward to understand the sequence. As Jack's jab extended, Bruce's body shifted forward and to the left, slipping inside Jack's guard in the microsecond between the jab's launch and full extension, his head movement making the jab miss by perhaps 3 inches. Jack's right cross, and already committed based on where he thought Bruce would be, sailed harmlessly over Bruce's shoulder. Before Jack could reset or throw his hook, Bruce's right hand shot forward in a straight punch, traveling maybe 8 inches, and struck Jack directly in the solar plexus with focused precision. The impact was controlled, not full power, but precise enough to achieve the desired effect. Jack's diaphragm seized, his forward momentum stopped instantly, his breath expelled in a sudden gasp. He stumbled backward 2 steps, both hands flying to his midsection, his face showing shock and confusion. Bruce stepped back immediately, giving Jack space to recover, his expression concerned rather than triumphant. The training hall erupted in shocked exclamations. Our instructors, who'd expected to see Bruce get hit, instead watching their combat veteran colleagues struggling to breathe, clearly affected by a strike that had looked almost gentle. If you're watching this story and learning something completely new about Bruce Lee, if this is showing you capabilities you never knew he had, hit that subscribe button right now, because there are dozens more documented accounts that prove Bruce Lee was absolutely legitimate. Jack recovered after about 15 seconds, his breathing returning to normal, his coordination restored. He stood upright slowly, testing his midsection, finding it sore but functional. He looked at Bruce with completely new eyes. What the hell was that? Jack's voice was hoarse. I threw a clean combination, professional technique, and you just disappeared. Made my punches hit air, and you then countered before I even realized you'd moved. You committed to a straight-line attack with predictable follow-up, Bruce explained calmly. Your jab told me the cross was coming, your weight distribution confirmed it. I slipped inside your line and countered to your solar plexus, the celiac plexus specifically. When struck correctly, it disrupts diaphragm function temporarily. One of the other instructors, a ranger instructor named Mike Stevens, spoke up. But Jack's got real combat experience, real training. How did you see his combination coming when he was throwing it at combat speed? I've studied boxing extensively, Bruce replied. Western boxing has common combinations, patterns that repeat. Once you recognize the setup, you can respond to the intention rather than waiting for the action to complete. Jack was still processing, still touching his solar plexus where Bruce had struck. I've been hit harder, taken more powerful strikes, but that was different. You didn't try to overpower me, you just hit exactly the right spot at exactly the right time. And if you're enjoying this story, if you're fascinated by these real accounts, hit that like button because it helps more people discover the truth about Bruce Lee. Mike Stevens stepped forward. I want to try. Different approach, different attack pattern. Let's see if your interception works against grappling. Jack held up his hand. Wait, I've got 2 more attempts. That was the agreement. 3 attempts, 3 different attacks. Bruce nodded. Whenever you're ready for your second attempt. Jack took a moment to think, clearly adjusting his strategy. As he'd tried striking and been countered before his combinations could develop, now he'd try something different. Second attempt, I'm going for a takedown, Jack announced. Military combatives close the distance and control you on the ground. Let's see if your striking works when I've got my hands on you. The instructors leaned forward, interested. This was more realistic to their experience, where fights often became grappling matches, where controlling an opponent's body was more reliable than trying to land precise strikes. Jack moved forward more cautiously this time, not rushing, keeping his hands ready to grab or defend. When he reached grappling range, he shot for Bruce's legs, a double-leg takedown executed with good technique and real commitment. Bruce's hips moved backward faster than Jack's hands could reach, and a perfectly timed sprawl that made Jack's grasping hands close on empty air. Simultaneously, Bruce's hands moved to control Jack's head, one hand on the back of Jack's neck, the other under his chin, positioning for a front headlock. But Bruce didn't complete the submission. Instead, he demonstrated the position for a moment, showing how he could control Jack's head and neck, then released and stepped back. From there, multiple options, Bruce explained. Guillotine choke if I wanted submission, knee strikes to the head if I wanted to finish with violence, or just control until help arrives. The key was not being where your takedown expected me to be. Jack stood up, clearly frustrated. You're faster than anyone I've trained with. I'll give you that. But speed alone doesn't win real fights. Real fights are about who can survive chaos, see who can function under extreme stress. Then let's test that, Bruce said. Your third attempt, attack me however you think best, represents real combat chaos. No technique I've already seen, full commitment, whatever you think would work in actual warfare. Jack looked around at his fellow instructors, saw them watching, waiting. His pride and his professional reputation were engaged now. He challenged this civilian martial artist, thinking he'd expose the limitations of non-military training, and instead he'd been countered twice in ways he'd never experienced. Third attempt, Jack said, and his voice carried a harder edge now. I'm going to attack like I would in actual combat, not trying to demonstrate technique or follow rules. I'm going to do whatever I think will work, and I'm going to commit fully. You sure you want that? I'm sure, Bruce replied calmly. Jack took a deep breath, centering himself, accessing the mindset that had kept him alive in Vietnam, the willingness to do whatever necessary to survive. Then he moved, not with the telegraphed commitment of his first 2 attempts, but with sudden, explosive violence. He feinted high with a punch, then immediately changed levels and drove forward for another takedown attempt, but this one was different, more desperate, more committed. If Bruce sprawled again, Jack was ready to transition to strikes, to eye gouges if necessary, to whatever worked. But Bruce didn't sprawl. As Jack changed levels, Bruce moved laterally, circling to Jack's left side, and his right hand struck down in a hammer fist toward the back of Jack's neck, stopping the strike maybe 2 inches from impact, demonstrating the opening without actually hitting. Strike to C7 vertebra, Bruce said quietly, maintaining position. Causes immediate unconsciousness, possible paralysis depending on force. This is the finishing strike, but I'm not following through because we're demonstrating, not fighting for real. Jack froze, feeling Bruce's hand hovering over the back of his neck. understanding that if Bruce had followed through with power, the fight would have ended with Jack unconscious or worse. He remained in his compromised position for a moment, processing the reality that he'd been defeated 3 times, 3 different attacks, 3 different counters, all executed with precision and control that showed Bruce could have seriously hurt him but chose not to. The training hall was absolutely silent. On 12 combat instructors watching their colleague in a completely dominated position, watching a civilian martial artist demonstrate capabilities they hadn't believed possible. Bruce stepped back and extended his hand. Jack stood up slowly and shook it firmly, his expression showing a mixture of respect, humility, and professional fascination. "Mr. Lee," Jack said, and his voice carried genuine sincerity, "I challenged you thinking I'd expose your techniques as ineffective for real combat. Instead, you just handled 3 committed attacks from a combat veteran and made it look easy. I was wrong, and I apologize." "No apology necessary," Bruce replied. "You were doing your job, testing whether civilian martial arts had value for military training. Now you have data to make an informed assessment. If you've made it this far in the story, I'd leave a comment below telling me what surprised you most. Was it how Bruce handled the combat veteran, the precision of his counters, the respect both men showed? I read every comment and want to know what resonates with you." Mike Stevens, the Ranger instructor, spoke up. "Mr. Lee, I've been teaching hand-to-hand combat for 8 years. I thought I understood fighting, understood what worked under pressure. You just showed me techniques and principles I've never encountered. Can you break down what you did?" Bruce spent the next 2 hours conducting an intensive seminar for the instructors, breaking down each exchange, explaining the principles, demonstrating on volunteers. He showed them how to read telegraphs, how to intercept rather than block, how to target vulnerable points for maximum effect with minimum force. He explained the difference between techniques that looked impressive and techniques that worked under pressure, between training for demonstration and training for survival. The instructors absorbed everything, asking intelligent questions, trying techniques under Bruce's guidance. Their skepticism transformed into genuine eagerness to learn. These were professional warriors who recognized superior knowledge when they saw it, who understood that Bruce had just demonstrated combat effectiveness at a level they hadn't encountered in military training. Jack Thornton was the most engaged student, working directly with Bruce, asking detailed questions about each counter, trying to understand how Bruce had read his attacks before they fully developed. His earlier certainty that this wouldn't work in real fighting had been completely demolished, replaced by humble recognition that fighting had dimensions he'd never explored despite 20 years of military combat experience. Colonel Chen watched with satisfaction, vindicated in his assessment that Bruce had something valuable to teach, even to Special Forces instructors who'd seen real combat. "Before we finish, I need to ask one favor. If this story gave you new perspective on Bruce Lee, on military combat training, on what real fighting effectiveness looks like, please share this video. Send it to someone who thinks military training is superior to all martial arts, who believes real combat experience trumps technique. Sharing helps preserve these real stories." After the seminar ended, Jack approached Bruce privately. "Mr. Lee, see what you demonstrated today, that's going to change how I teach hand-to-hand combat. Would you be willing to work with our program? Help us integrate your principles into military combatives training?" Bruce considered the offer. "I'm willing to consult, to share principles. But you should understand that what I teach is optimized for unarmed combat, one-on-one situations. Military combat involves weapons, multiple opponents, different tactical contexts. My techniques can supplement your training but shouldn't replace the military-specific skills you've developed." "That's exactly the right approach," Jack agreed. "We're not looking to abandon our training, just to enhance it with principles we've been missing. What you showed today, the ability to read intentions and intercept before attacks fully develop, that's applicable across all combat contexts." Over the following months, Bruce made several more trips to Fort Bragg, working with the Special Forces hand-to-hand combat program, teaching interception principles, demonstrating targeting strategies, helping instructors understand how to integrate martial arts concepts with military combatives. His influence on military training methods would extend for decades, long after his death in 1973. Jack Thornton continued his military career, eventually retiring as a command sergeant major, and throughout his remaining years of service, he would tell the story of the day he challenged Bruce Lee, thinking he'd expose civilian martial arts as ineffective for real combat, only to discover that he'd been operating with incomplete knowledge despite 20 years of combat experience. So in his retirement interview for a military history project, Jack was asked about the most important lesson he'd learned in 30 years of military service. His answer surprised the interviewer. He described the April day at Fort Bragg when a 140-pound civilian martial artist had handled 3 committed attacks from a combat veteran and demonstrated that real fighting effectiveness came from understanding, precision, and timing, rather than just size, strength, and combat experience. He talked about how Bruce had shattered his certainty that military training was superior to all civilian martial arts, how that humbling experience had made him a better instructor and a more complete fighter. The documentary included photographs from that day showing Bruce demonstrating techniques to serious-faced military instructors, Jack Thornton watching with focused intensity the moment of the solar plexus strike, and later images of Bruce teaching at Fort Bragg, this civilian martial artist earning the respect of America's most elite warriors. Hit that subscribe button one final time if you haven't already, because Bruce Lee's story is filled with moments like this, seconds-long exchanges that challenged fundamental assumptions, demonstrations that proved impossible capabilities, humble teachings that transformed elite warriors, and opened military minds to possibilities beyond their extensive combat experience. The legacy of that Fort Bragg demonstration extends far beyond the 12 instructors who witnessed it, beyond special forces training methods, beyond even the question of whether civilian martial arts could match military combat systems. It represented a meeting point between Eastern martial philosophy and Western military pragmatism, between traditional technique and combat-proven methods, between the belief that real fighting required extensive combat experience and the understanding that deep study of principles could surpass experience through superior knowledge. Jack Thornton had 20 years of military service, 3 combat tours in Vietnam, had killed enemy soldiers with his hands, had survived situations that killed better men, had trained in military combat systems tested in actual warfare. Bruce Lee was a civilian martial artist who'd never served in the military, never been in warfare, weighed 70 pounds less than Jack. By every conventional military measure, Jack should have dominated him easily, capable his combat experience and military training overwhelming any civilian martial arts technique. But in 3 brief exchanges, Bruce proved that real fighting effectiveness didn't require military service or combat experience, that understanding principles at a deep level could overcome apparent advantages in size and battlefield testing, that someone who'd never been in warfare could defend against and counter someone who'd survived multiple combat tours. Jack told Bruce this won't work in a real fight, challenged him to prove his techniques against committed attacks from a combat veteran, expected to validate the military's certainty that their combat systems were superior to civilian martial arts. Seconds later, Jack was struggling to breathe from a precise strike to his solar plexus. His takedown attempts defeated before they could develop, his final desperate attack countered with a demonstrated strike to the back of his neck that could have rendered him unconscious. 3 attempts, 3 different approaches, 3 demonstrations that fighting has dimensions. Military training hadn't fully explored, that precision can overcome size, that understanding can surpass experience, and that the most dangerous opponent isn't necessarily the one with the most combat tours, but the one who sees combat from a different angle and plays the game at a level you didn't know existed.